in our lab for the past decade. Our approach takes inspiration from another paradigm shift that's happening in this time in neuroscience, called predictive processing. And as is the case often in science, you know that something's really important when people discover it again and again and again, and they give it different names. So people also call this active inference, and they also call it the Bayesian brain, and they also call it belief propagation. You could just call it associative processing. There are many names you could give to it. Unconscious inference, if you want to go back all the way to Helmholtz, which we will. But the idea is that in daily life, it feels like we encounter situations in the world, like with stimuli, and we react to them. But predictive processing is the hypothesis that the brain is constantly predicting, constantly anticipating what it's going to encounter next and what it has to do next. I'm just going to give you the gist of how this works, given time constraints. But I'd be happy to point you to one of the more than 500 empirical studies that we've identified in the literature that actually support this hypothesis. When considered together, these studies form a coherent neurobiologically inspired research program that explains how the variety of mental events that make up your mind, that make up your mental life, are constructed from the same anatomical and neural features. That is, the same general causes. So here's the gist. If we take your brain's point of view for a moment, your brain is basically entombed in a dark, silent box called your skull. And it has to learn what's going on around it in the world by scraps of information that it receives from the sensory environment, right? Light, so changes in light and chemicals and air pressure and so on. But these it's receiving the effects of some set of causes. And it doesn't know what the causes are. It has to guess. Ditto for any information coming from the body. So your brain is right now, you're sitting here listening to me, not aware of the fact, I hope, that there is a drama playing out inside your own body where there is constant stream of sensory input that is reaching your brain. And again, your brain has to, these are the effects of some set of causes. Your brain has to figure out what are the causes. You have an ache in your gut. Is that hunger? Is that anxiety? Is that a feeling that somebody is guilty of a crime if you're, let's say, in a courtroom? So how does your brain solve this, what is in effect an inverse inference problem or a reverse inference problem? And the answer seems to be by remembering past experiences that are similar in some way, where to the present, where the physical changes in the world and the body are in some way functionally similar to something that's happened in the past. And so the general idea here is that you have a complex dynamical system in your skull built with neurons and other biological elements that are continually re-implementing past experiences. And every action you take, every experience you construct, it's all happening automatically without your awareness, begins as a population of past experiences that are your brain's hypotheses, best guess of what is going to happen next. Each hypothesis is a plan for action, that is how to change the internal systems of the body in order to support motor movement and what those movements should be. And then what you are likely to see and hear and smell and feel as a result. That is, these past experiences, this population of instances that your brain generates, are perceptual inferences about upcoming sense data. So your brain is a population generator that is generating statistical inferences, which are guesses about what actions are likely to be most beneficial in the next moment, given the probable cause of the sensory input. and sense data from the body and the world help to select the instance, the representation that best fits the particular situation. And that's what becomes your action, guides your action, and becomes your experience. So as a heuristic, this is basically the biology of meaning making. And each time a hypothesis is chosen, and it becomes your experience and guides your actions, its prior probability is strengthened, making more likely that the brain will construct it again. Now, if I had more time, I would discuss with you how this changes our understanding of what memory is, of what a concept is, and what categorization means. But I don't, so I'm happy to answer questions. I'll stick around if people have questions afterwards. But I do want to point out that this idea is also been lost and rediscovered many times in psychology, including, but not limited to, Hermann von Helmholtz when he wrote about unconscious inference. So neuroscientists now are actively engaged in trying to sort out how prediction signals are constructed in the hippocampus and the cerebellum, in the cerebellum, which you can only see here tucked under the cortex, and in the cerebral cortex. And in my lab, we've been working with neuroscientists and psychologists and engineers and computer scientists on a whole brain model that integrates all of these without losing the mind, right? Without losing the mental features that make your experience. And so I'm just going to show you one nugget that we've been working on, and then we'll wrap up. There's over 30 years of research, really rich empirical research in anatomical studies of track tracing studies in primates and other mammals to suggest that certain neurons in the cerebral cortex, by virtue of their architectural arrangement and their connectivity, give rise to prediction signals which then propagate out to motor and sensory regions in the brain. These neurons, where prediction signals are thought to emerge, are located in the shaded parts of this diagram. So here what I've done is I've just taken the cerebral cortex. The left is a lateral view and the right is a medial view. So if you take the brain and you crack it open like an egg and you just look at the inside surface, that's what you see on the right. And I've just plastered onto that some demarcations from structural demarcations. This is from, they're called Brodmann areas, but done by Brodmann. They're actually pretty standardly used in this mapping is pretty standardly used in neuroscience. And the regions that I've shaded in gray are the regions, and I should also say the hippocampus as well, are regions that are thought to, where prediction signals are thought to emerge and then propagate out to the rest of the brain. These regions have another name. They're called limbic regions, actually, by virtue of their structure. So the irony here is that limbic regions, which scientists thought were the home of emotions and the most reactive parts of the brain, are actually, we think, the source of prediction signals that drive perception and action throughout your brain. Not just during instances of emotion, but for all mental events, from the moment that you're born until the moment that you die, your brain is predicting sensory input from the world and anticipating how to act on them with limbic cortices. The other thing which limbic cortices do, and in fact the reason why they evolved, or a reason why they evolved, not the reason, or say it this way, they evolved and they perform a major basic function, which is to regulate your body. This is a quote from the neuroscientists Peter Sterling and Laughlin. The core task of all brains is to regulate the organism's internal milieu by anticipating the needs of the body and preparing to satisfy them before they arise. What this means is that metabolism and energy regulation may be another core mechanism that is important to mental events. Because as your brain is doing whatever it does, seeing, feeling, thinking, it's also regulating your body. And if we look evolutionarily, we can see that brains did not evolve to think and see and feel. They evolved to regulate an ever-expanding and more complex body. And so your brain thinks and feels and sees in the service of regulating your body. I don't mean circulating glucose levels here. I mean energy regulation in a very basic way, which scientists call allostasis. So I'm going to wrap up. Well, I'm really going much longer than I had thought. So I'll just end by saying that there is an opportunity here to do science very differently by studying psychological phenomena as populations of variable instances, because the variation is real. We, as humans, human brain creates statistical summaries of those variations, and then we believe those summaries are real. And as scientists, we reify those summaries as the phenomenon of interest. But as William James pointed out, the great snare of the psychologist is the confusion of his own standpoint with that of the mental fact about which he is making his report. This is naive realism, right? And it's related to essentialism, which was a whole other section in this talk which I removed because I didn't have time. So here are the takeaways. Variation is the norm. Think about designing your experiments differently. If you want to understand the cause of this variation, ask questions about mechanism and computation, looking at general causes, and avoid naive realism. If you want to know more about this, you can look at any of my papers from my lab. You can look at this book, which Roddy mentioned, and my new book, which is actually a series of little essays about the brain. And the real heroes here, are the lab. They do all the really hard work. I just get to stand up here and have fun telling you about it. But I want to point out in particular, I don't have a pointer, but I want to point out in particular Christy Westland, who's third from the right. Yeah, second from the left, Katie Homand, who actually were the lead graduate students on much of the research that I showed you today. Thank you for your patience.